Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's AT3 Center webinar, Accessibility for Web Content Authors. Our presenter today is Rob Carr from the Oklahoma Able Tech program. Next slide, please. Just a few reminders before we begin today. To see captions, please click on the CC button on your control panel at the bottom of your screen. Also, please enter any questions or comments that you have into the chat window. We will address those comments as appropriate or at the end of the presentation. Again, I'd like to remind you to check out our upcoming events at the at3center.net events page. Registration links will be sent out through the AT3 listserv and the ICT Community of Practice listserv for upcoming events. Please be on the lookout for automated accessibility testing on May 19th, manual accessibility testing on May 26th, and accessibility and technologies purchases and use decisions on July 14th. As always, we would appreciate it if you would please complete the post-webinar survey when you receive it. It will be listed at surveymonkey.com, and you will receive an email reminder. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Rob Carr from the Oklahoma Able Tech program.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you, folks, for joining us here today. Good day. I'm glad to spend some time with y'all, and this is the only way we can spend time with people virtually. So welcome and thank you very much. Thank you to AT3 Center for handling all of the logistics. I will keep the chat window open. One note with the chat: if you want everybody, including the attendees and those of us who are the panelists on the back end, to see your message in the chat, be sure that you select all panelists and attendees in the little drop down that is near the on my screen, the bottom of the chat window. If you just want the panelists to see it, you can leave it as it is, I think, by default, which is to all panelists. So I want to start just a little bit high level to begin with and talk about responsibility for accessibility on the web. And the point is that the responsibility for making content accessible is something that's really shared. It's not a centralized responsibility within an organization of any size. There might be policy that says that a group or an individual has more responsibility for oversight, or that they have some kind of centralized responsibility. But in general, it's not sustainable to centralize everything. In other words, it doesn't work to just create a bunch of stuff and send it to a person or an office and have them make it accessible after the fact. You would invest far more money in hiring people to keep up with that pace, especially in a larger organization or an organization that has a larger digital footprint, than if you just distribute the work out to the source. And in general, accessibility follows job roles. So if you have a hand and you're on this webinar, so more than likely you have a hand in creating your organization's digital footprint. And that means that accessibility follows you through your job role, follows to you, and needs to flow through you in the content that you create. So really high level idea to get us started. Then a few points. The platform that your website is published on is really, really important to this whole conversation about accessibility, because it determines what you can or cannot do. In the last few years, for the most part, the web environments and even learning management systems, for those of you who might be in teaching or academia, have improved support for accessibility. What I mean by support for accessibility is really twofold. One, it's got to be able to let you as a content author create and publish something that is accessible. So you have the tools that you need, you have the settings, you have access to the things that you need to create accessible content. On the flip side, for you, the content author, the interface also needs to be accessible, because otherwise, as an organization, you put yourself in a situation where you might end up accidentally discriminating against somebody, or you'll end up with a situation where someone who uses assistive technology or has a form of a vision disability or hearing loss, and they might not be able to create content that they're required to do as a part of their job. So there are really two tiers to the conversation about accessibility in the authoring environments. And this is going to be a repeating theme, a recurring theme. You've got to weigh accessibility in that selection decision. It may be that you don't have direct control over that, but you might be able to bring it up. You might be able to influence a conversation about a platform decision to include accessibility up front. And I would weigh it pretty heavily, because again, if the platform doesn't do what it needs to, then you as a content author won't be able to do what you need to do either. Then we trickle down one more level to the theme of the website. So you're on a platform, on a learning management or content management system that has really good support for accessibility. And then you start looking at a theme, the look and the feel of the website. And a lot of the themes actually define the way some elements are structured. And I'll talk about that when I switch over to demonstration mode here in a few minutes. Just like with the platform, it's really, really important to weigh accessibility in as you're looking at and selecting a theme. It's also really important to include it if you're having somebody do the design work for you. So if you have a design firm that is designing a website for you, they're going to turn it over to you to manage content, but they're doing the design work. It's very, again, similar to what I've just said a few times. Bring accessibility up as a requirement from the very beginning. That gets into procurement, and as Dave said, that's another webinar that we'll do here in another few weeks. But it is really important whether you're looking at an off-the-shelf theme, paid or free, or you're looking to have somebody do the design work for you to get accessibility in there from the very beginning. And then finally, and this will be the last time that I repeat this phrase that I'll say again here in a few minutes, the same logic applies to plugins and widgets. So you think about things like a date picker or an accordion menu. If you're in an environment like WordPress, which is what I'll demonstrate today, you have a pretty big set of options for different plugins that you can grab and use. The plugins, the widgets, again, define the look and feel of that particular element, and they also define the behavior. One more time, weigh accessibility in to that selection decision, because if you select, say, a date picker that's not accessible, then it's similar to selecting a platform without good accessibility support, in that no matter what you do, if the accordion is not accessible, then the end result won't be accessible, right? And again, this is true for off-the-shelf plugins and widgets that you might have available through your platform of choice, or if you are working with someone or directly creating them yourself. So some high-level thoughts to get us started. But what I really want to focus on from here is getting started with this. And when it comes to creating a more accessible website, it's really difficult to go from not very accessible to completely accessible overnight. It does take some time. So when we advise folks about where to get started with this journey, really two general places that I would suggest. One is where you directly control things. Right? So the things that you have direct control over are probably the easiest things to begin to address. Then, like I mentioned with platform or theme or plugin decisions, there might be some things where you don't have direct decision-making authority, but you can influence the conversation. So what I suggest is to take a look at where you have direct control. Right? The things that you actually create or edit or that you are responsible for, the things that are right within reach of your responsibilities are the places that it's generally easiest to get going with this from a nuts and bolts kind of level. There's a comment from Sally about a plugin. I'll just read it real quick. A plugin won't make your site 100% compliant. Saw a site using a WordPress accessible plugin. It had many errors when you ran a test. Can I elaborate on this and what more can be done? So that's a big question. There's some misunderstanding, I think, and I know where it comes from. I'm not going to go off and grab a soapbox and bring it back and get on it about some of the technologies that promise instant accessibility. I'm not familiar with the WordPress Accessible plugin. I know that there are basically two categories of products out there. One is basically built-in assistive technology, where it might have an option for you to change font sizes. It might have some read aloud features. There is one that's escaping me right now that we just talked with someone about this last week. And those are nice to have, but won't overcome an inaccessible website. So focus on making the website accessible from the beginning. Yes, Recite Me. Emily, thank you. That's the one that I had a conversation with folks. Actually, it's come up a couple of times in the last month or so. But tools like Recite Me, again, are nice to have. And I don't think that they really market saying they will make an inaccessible website accessible, but it's important not to take that logical leap that they will. There's another category of products that's popped up here in the last few months that are generally referred to as overlays. And this is a product that you can license, and they say that the product will actually make your website more accessible. Focus on your stuff. A quick solution like that is not generally going to work. From the testing that I've seen other people do, people that I trust that have tested products in that category have noted that they're not as sweeping as advertised, maybe. So always, always, always focus on making your content more accessible. Focus on those three things that I mentioned: your platform, your design, and any widgets or plugins that you use, and make sure that those are sound and as accessible as they can be. And then, like I say, if you want to look at a product from the category like Recite Me that builds in some assistive technology, it doesn't hurt. Most of the feedback I've gotten from folks with disabilities is that they have their own AT, right? They have their own assistive technology. It's set up the way that they want it. There's no learning curve. There's no extra stuff to do once they get to a website. And that's why I say it could be a nice to have, but focus on making the content itself more accessible to begin with. So good question, Sally, thank you. And Emily, thank you again for the reminder on Recite Me. So I'm going to talk today and demonstrate from WordPress. That's our web environment at AbleTech. WordPress was originally a blog platform and somehow morphed into a really widely used content management system over the last few years. While I'm showing this to you in WordPress, it's important to bear in mind that the concepts that I'm going to discuss really apply just about across all file types. There is actually an archived webinar from, it was, I think, the beginning of 2020, or it might have been 1934 with the pandemic. I have no concept of time anymore, but I know there is an archived webinar about accessibility in Word, and there's one on PowerPoint, and there's a series on PDF that myself and my coworker, Alyssa Prince, did, and that is out on the AT3 Center archive page. But if you're in G Suite, if you're using InDesign to create PDFs, whatever the authoring environment is, these concepts are going to be consistent. And Sally just put a link in the chat as well about, and I just saw this in the last week or so. We hosted our accessibility conference last week, and I bet that's where some of these questions came up. But somebody wrote an extension for Chrome called Accessibility that will turn off an overlay. And so Sally put that into the chat if you want to dig into that a little bit. So again, I'm talking about WordPress and showing WordPress. The concepts are going to be the same. The mechanics of how you actually apply the concepts might be a little different in a different content management system. And this will be a place where you might start to find that, especially if you have a little bit older CMS or an older web authoring environment, you might find that the support isn't there to do everything that I demonstrate. And again, that goes back to the platform itself and making sure that it can do everything that it needs to for you. So I'm actually going to jump out of the slides real quick. And you should be able to see my WordPress interface. If somebody could just verify in the chat that you can see my WordPress here, then I'll be more comfortable. Okay, John, thank you. I think even though we've been using Zoom, I mean, we've actually used Zoom for quite a while at AbleTech, but especially over the last year, still not a bad idea to check. So I'm just going to create a brand new page. And I'm going to use the default editor for WordPress. We run Beaver Builder, a plugin for authoring in WordPress as well. I'm just going to go with the stock editor here and talk about some of the things that you need to make sure that you do. And there's going to be some overlap in this conversation between what the authoring environment does in this screen, where we've got our edit window and we can add content, and what a theme might do. The theme that we have running, and all the themes that we have running across a couple of different AbleTech properties, we do vet them for accessibility. And one thing to keep in mind is that you'll often find several themes that are pretty accessible, and it gets down to really nitpicky stuff that makes you choose one over another. And sometimes that means that there may be something a little bit annoying, but it's less annoying potentially than another thing in another theme. So this can get to be a little bit of a loaded conversation, and we've had it turn into a philosophical conversation about accessibility, particularly in the way that this theme handles this first thing that I'm going to talk about. So what I've got on screen now, the screens in most authoring environments get a little bit busy. The left-hand side of the screen visually has all of my different options to navigate around into the different plugins that we have installed, to build new pages, et cetera, et cetera. The main screen where I can start editing is titled Add New Page. It takes the focus. In other words, it puts the cursor in a field that is labeled Add Title. So this title is for the web page. And what you want with a web page title is to have something that is descriptive of the content that the web page will hold. And it should also be unique in your website. For those of you who've done trainings on PowerPoint, especially if you've heard from me, I talk about making sure that you don't repeat the titles of slides. On the web, you also don't want to repeat the title of pages. And generally speaking, you don't have many pages that continue, right? Where you might find a breakpoint in the page and say, gosh, I need another page that picks up where this first one left off, and I'm going to repeat the titles. That's not as common. That gets into the importance of accessibility in information architecture, which is the design and layout and thinking through how all of the pages and content in a website fit together and where they should all live relative to one another. In this case, with all of that said, I'm going to make a title, and I know this is something, well, I don't know, for everybody's sake, but I know that this is something that some of us are starting to discuss, which is our back to work plan. I know Oklahoma State University, where AbleTech is housed, has talked about what's it going to be like coming back to work. We're planning on having students back in the fall. And so we're looking at, I think in August, having most folks who haven't been working in a distributed offsite office back on campus sometime in August, I think, in advance of students coming back. So this seems like a topical title. So in WordPress, when I type this in, I get a couple of things. I get the actual title of the page. Now, a page title is actually what you would see visibly on each web browser tab that you have open, right? So this title attribute is populating the tab itself. And it's also the first thing that a screen reader should announce. It'll announce the title of the page that it lands on. Might announce some other information depending on settings and such. It's going to be one of the first things that someone who's using a screen reader will hear the reader announce. In the case of this page, in this theme, the title also becomes the first heading on the page. And heading is the next thing, or headings are the next thing that I'll talk about. It's really important to, number one, use headings to chunk up your content. So I guess there are really two pieces to that, right? One is to chunk your content up so that you're not just dumping everything into people's brains all at one time. And two is, in those different chunks of content, identify a way to head up that content, a way to introduce that content, and that becomes your heading. So in this case, I know that back to work plan, as I've typed it in, is my first level heading. I'm going to type my second heading here, and I'm just going to call this back to work plan. Let's do this, back to work phase 1. In WordPress, where I turn this into a heading, because a heading is different content, right? It's not a little snippet of text that's just a sentence fragment. it's important because it does head up this next bit of content. In this case, what the reader will expect is to read about phase 1 of the Back to Work plan. And I derive that information because of the text in the heading. In order to make a bit of text into an actual heading, we've got to change the style. And again, in Word, we talk about word styles. Here we talk about like lowercase style. But in WordPress and in your environment, it may be very similar. You'll find a drop-down. In this case, it's at the upper left of the WordPress text editor. And there is a little drop-down. And when I open it up, I see all of the styles, the text styles that I have available. Now, what's nice about this is when I change the style here, it doesn't just make a visual change. What I mean by that is I could just go into this text that I entered. I could highlight it. I could make the font bigger. I could make it bold. I could italicize. I could do all kinds of things that are only visual changes. And that's a problem because if the structure isn't there to back those visible changes up, then, for example, someone using a screen reader will have no idea that this is a heading. They'll just hear Back to Work phase 1. And most screen reader users that I've met don't have their readers set to announce all of those different visual style changes. That's not true maybe across the board, but in general, in my experience, that hasn't been the case. So to make this into an actual heading, we are going to look at this drop-down list, and we need to think not only about the heading, but the heading level. We've got options here, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4. We've also got keyboard shortcuts to apply these different headings. Shift-Alt-2 applies heading 2, Shift-Alt-3 hits heading 3, and Shift-Alt-4 will assign a heading level of 4. The levels with the headings define the way the content chunks are related to one another. So if we think about Back to Work plan being the main heading for this page, we're not going to have another first level heading. Everything from here down will either be a 2 or lower. In this case, this is just an immediate child chunk, if you will, of the first heading, Back to Work plan. So I'm going to make this a heading 2. I'm just going to select that from my drop-down list, and I get the structural change made back behind the screen. When I publish this site, the heading text will be wrapped up in the appropriate tag so that it's actually identified as a heading, whether someone's looking at it visibly, having a screen reader announce it, getting it sent to a braille display, and so on and so forth. The lower numbers that you'll use, like I mentioned, we've got heading 3, heading 4, etc. Those will be if you have another subsection. So if I have a little bit of text in here that introduces this really quickly, and then I go back to work, phase 1, part 1. So this is a subsection of the last section. So the heading that I'm going to apply here will be a heading 3. A couple of things. To the extent possible, you don't want to skip heading levels. So you don't want to go from heading 2 to heading 4. There should be an incremental step from one to the other. Now, in this case, if I don't have any more subsections, and my next section is going to be another second level heading, then that's fine. I can go from 3 to 2. I could go from 4 back to heading level 2 if that's what the content needs me to do. I just can't skip as I'm incrementing through, because that would mean basically that I have kind of an orphaned subsection, right? I'd have a subsection that for some reason isn't related to the other sections in a logical way. So this is a relatively easy one. The interface, again, depending on your web environment, could look a little bit different. Sometimes it's a drop-down. Sometimes it is more like the interface in Microsoft Word, where I don't have a drop-down of styles to choose from. I actually have a button for each heading level that I can select from. Your mileage will vary based entirely on your learning management system. At the end of our time together, I will link out to a couple of sets of resources that will link you then again out to accessibility support documentation for at least the most common learning management systems and content management systems that we have found. So another quick formatting thing to keep in mind, and another easy win for accessibility, is that when you type a list of items, make sure that you take advantage of the editor's list formatting. I've got 2 different list formats that I can choose from here in this text editor. just a couple of spots to the right of where I selected my headings, I've got a button that looks like a bulleted list, and it has a label, bulleted list, and it gives, again, a shortcut, a keyboard shortcut that I can use to assign this bulleted list style. Right next to that one, I can assign a numbered list. So if I have a numbered set of steps, I would choose that. In this case, I'm not going to worry about a numbered set. I'm just going to create a bulleted list. And what I do is I type in my first list item, pardon me. I type in my first list item, and when I hit enter, it visibly keeps everything indented the same. So this helps, again, visibly to help people to more quickly identify that this isn't a paragraph. You know, I've got the bullets there as a cue. It's indented a little bit differently, so it stands out visibly. And again, if someone uses a screen reader and they encounter this content, the reader is actually going to announce that there's a list and how many items are in it. And then when it's done announcing the list, it will announce end of list, which cues the reader to know, hey, I'm going back to a different kind of content now. I'm out of that list. Another quick and easy win. If your content management system won't let you format a list, then I have concerns about it. That should be a feature in just about every editor out there. You should be able to define styles. You really should be able to do all of these things, because I'm not getting into anything super advanced just because of the amount of time we have and not wanting to stuff brains too full of information in one setting. There are, in addition to these structural components that I've talked about with accessibility, it's really important for us to bear in mind that there are visual components to accessibility as well. And there are a lot of things that we see on the web that we encounter in testing that tell us that a lot of designers and content folks both are missing out on some of these color-related issues. Number one, almost every web page, every website that we test, we find problems with color contrast. So in this case, the background for this web page is white. I'm going to type some text in. I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to change the color. And I can do that in any number of ways. I've got custom colors. I'm just going to go super light. I'll go with a light gray. So in this case, sorry, I had to cough again. It's going to be really strange when we do in-person trainings again, and I can't mute for a cough. I'm not going to know what to do. I think I'll carry my little hockey puck speaker microphone that I use around with me and hit the button anyway, just as a safety net. So I've lightened this text color to a relatively light gray. There is a risk of lightening colors too much. And that risk is that if you fall below a certain threshold, people aren't going to be able to read it. And it may be that people that have vision that measures out really, really well won't be able to read it even contextually. So if someone's outside, lighter text on lighter background, darker text on darker background will wash out. We talk about this difference between color and brightness as color contrast. I'm not going to get into testing for that. That's the next couple of webinars where Lissa will get into actually testing this stuff. But this is something that you should really factor in. This can get a little interesting if you're not the web designer. In other words, there are often a different office or a different individual will define colors in your text styles. So again, if we look at this drop down of styles, I've got paragraph, which I should have mentioned, that's just your regular text. I have the different headings, and then I've got a few other options here. I'm just going to worry about paragraph and heading. And we have seen websites where the style itself has poor color contrast with the background that's behind it once the page is actually sent out to the browser. So that's a tricky one, right? We're saying, or I'm telling you, make sure that you apply these headings. You've got to be sure that the headings don't cause a problem as far as color contrast. You can go in and override it. It just gets kind of annoying to have to go in and do that. So color contrast is a very big one. The other color-related accessibility issue that we see pretty often is using color. I'll give you a quick example. And then I'll take a break. I've got a question in the Q&A, and I see a chat in a comment in the chat as well. So if I change this text color, again, I typed some text in and it literally says some text in. I'm going to switch over to what is pretty close to the color. It actually might be a little darker than the orange that is in Oklahoma State University's color palette. It's literally America's brightest orange. That's the tagline that the university has used for a while. And I think, Angela, I might be kind of speaking to your comment with this. Oranges are really difficult when it comes to contrast. Dark oranges generally don't contrast well enough against dark backgrounds, and bright oranges don't contrast against light backgrounds. So in this case, and I think your comment kind of took me to an answer anyway. The other thing that I might have done by changing this color to an orange, in addition to potentially introducing a color contrast issue, is let's say that it's important that this is orange text. Let's say that I'm going to come in here and type a line. I'm just typing really important information is in orange. So once I do that, once I make that statement, really, I kind of set myself up to fail, because I am using the color to convey literally really important information. This line says I'm emphasizing things by changing the color of the text. What if someone can't perceive the difference in color, or they perceive the color differently and might not know the difference between red and green, for example, if someone's red-green colorblind? You know, color can be really helpful. Color coding text can be helpful. Color coding in charts and graphs is almost necessary. So what we take out of accessibility standards is not a directive to not use color at all. It's to use color and some other visible cue, right? You need to use something in addition to color to call attention to, in this case, really important information. What you can do, again, is going to be driven by your content management system or your web authoring environment. Let's see from my list of styles. So I don't have styles defined to emphasize text. So it could be that I add, well, it could be that I just take out the mention of color. And in this case, maybe my best option is to strip out the color, and I turn really important information into another section subheading. And then all I have in the below is maybe a bulleted list of really important information. You'll also see this where required fields are identified. And we'll say, I'll put a little line in here above my text that's orange. Required fields are indicated, well, I will just say are orange and show an asterisk. So in this case, I'm just going to add an asterisk, and this would be a form field label. I'll change it so it makes a little bit more sense if you're reading it and it's confusing. Maybe this is a label for a first name field. I've added something in addition to color to cue somebody to know, so that if they can't perceive the color, that this is a required field. The comment about possibly italicizing. The tricky thing about using italics, unless it's tied to a style, and it's actually even trickier then, is that the assistive technology won't announce that, right? So making a visible change is only going to be a visible change. It may be that someone has their screen reader set to announce all of those visual only changes like bolding or italicizing, but in general, that's not the case. So I like to make things as simple and obvious as possible. In this case, what I suggest for form fields, for those of you who might build forms on a web page, is to literally put the word required as a parenthetical note next to the required fields and put it in the label itself. That takes away as much ambiguity as you can. That makes it as low of a cognitive load as you can put on somebody, just about, to make sure that they know which fields are required and which ones aren't. When you get into data visualizations, again, could literally be a whole class on accessible data visualizations and charts and graphs and such, but the visual elements where you do use color to indicate, different lines on a line graph, etc. Again, you need to introduce something in addition to the color, and there are lots of options, and that's why it's a whole other class, but something to think about when you're creating content, when you're putting images of charts or graphs in, is to make sure that the visual accessibility is accounted for. I'm going to pause and take a look at a couple of the questions. Angela had talked about the challenges with color, complementary blue that works well, but not everyone chooses it. Yeah, oranges are really tricky. And I will say, and this is a ways out, the World Wide Web Consortium is working on the next generation of web accessibility standards, and they're looking at color contrast very differently. We have technology that can do more than technology could do when these contrast ratios were established. And so I know that they are trying to make it so that it's not as restrictive. So folks like Angela, you and us at AbleTech, when we bring any OSU piece in, it should be easier, because you can have things that pass the current standards for color contrast that are functionally not readable. So, and everybody in the standards world knows this. And as I said, with the next generation of standards, they are taking a look at addressing that in a different way. Eileen, you asked, do I have experience working with accessibility on Adobe Contribute? I don't, I'm afraid, I'm sorry. So images. Images on the web are as ingrained in web content as anything else. They are as important to the web as anything else. What's important from an accessibility perspective is that any image that has meaning that you put into a web page, you have to make sure that there is a text equivalent available for it. And there are a few different ways to do that. I'm going to start out with one of the more, I guess, straightforward, and then we'll work our way into taking a look at other places that you might include that text description if it's really long. So I'm going to add an image. We don't have a lot in here, I don't think. Somewhere I have a cat picture because I've used it in another training. Yeah, here we go. So the way that WordPress and several other learning management systems work is you have a media library. So what I did to get this started is I clicked a button that's actually slightly above my text editor. The button is labeled Add Media. And in WordPress, that opens up the media library. I can upload a file here directly. There's another tab that will let me do that. But at least in WordPress, when you do upload a media file, it goes into this library. And every time you insert media, this is where you would start. There is an option to provide what's called alternative text in the files in the media library. Alternative text is probably the most common place for that text equivalent to go. It's actually a part of the HTML specification. Alt text is another primary meaning, another way to convey the primary meaning of an image. It is as important, according to our standards, as the image itself. I would caution against including alt text in the libraries because, and I'll show you an example why in just a moment, and I'll just carry on with that. So I have this picture of my cat, pardon me. So this is Elliot. He's outside despite the rain. He's probably hunting things that have come out with the rain that we've had in the last few hours. This is a gray striped cat laying on a gray striped rug. Now, let's say that I have a caption here, and I'm not going to add a caption for the sake of time, but let's say that I make a remark in a caption along the lines of, this cat hides in plain sight. If someone can't see the image, the joke is lost, right? If they don't know that the cat matches the rug, which is totally why we got him, not really, he was a little white puffball when we got him, but he turned out to match the living room beautifully. If someone can't see the image to know that this is a gray striped cat on a gray striped rug, the joke is lost. So in this case, my alternative text is going to be a little bit more descriptive, but still brief, right? I need to move my zoom out of the way there. So I click on the image. So I'm trying to move things around and I'm moving things into the wrong place. Okay, now I can click where I need to. So I'm going to select the image. And again, this is the default WordPress editor. I have an option here to edit the image. It looks like a little pencil. And I'm going to open this up, and I have at the very top of my image details pop-up that just appeared, a field labeled alternative text. So for this purpose, for this context, I'm going to just do that short description that I've been using. So gray, striped cat on a gray striped rug. Then my caption, which is going to be visible. That's important as well. Alternative text is not visible. You can find it. And again, come back for the testing sessions and you'll hear all about how you can expose alternative text pretty easily. But it's not visible for anybody that is either not looking for it. So your average web user wouldn't ever see your alternative text. But for your audience who is using that screen reader, using that Braille display, it's critical. The caption is visible. Okay, so I'm going to type a caption here and we'll go back into the page and we'll see. So my caption again is "This cat hides in plain sight." So I'm going to click the update button. The caption appears visibly under the photo, but the alt text, again, and alt text is just a shorthand for alternative text. The alt text is now basically nested back behind the image. The screen reader, as soon as it gets to this image, will announce the alt attribute. It will announce whatever you typed into that alternative text field. This is another place to look in your platform. And if you can't add alternative text, then you're kind of stuck. And it unfortunately probably is time to think about moving to a different environment that will actually support creating accessible content, because this is one of the more fundamental aspects alongside headings and lists. This is one of the most fundamental parts of making the web more accessible, is creating the text equivalents and having that alt text attribute to be able to tuck that into. Now, if you had much longer description, let's say that you're typing in that alternative text box, you type a couple of short sentences, you start to type a third, that's when you might think about turning this into a text equivalent and actually putting that descriptive text into the narrative of your page somewhere. Generally, longer alternative text is more descriptive, in my experience at least, or it might be trying to convey some of the story that the piece that you're writing is actually trying to tell. You don't have a hard and fast rule about the length of alternative text. There's nothing that says that it can only be 250 characters. But the longer it gets, the less likely people are to actually stick with it and read it. I'll give you an example. I've seen images of data tables. Okay, so a data table really should be a data table, but I've seen people insert the image of a data table into a web page, and then the alternative text that they type basically tries to read the table, right? So it's what you would announce if you were reading the table, basically taking the place of a screen reader and also taking away the screen reader user's autonomy to be able to move around the table in different ways. Alternative text is read the way it's typed. So in that situation, that's a situation where you're creating a lot more work for yourself and you're really taking a lot away from the experience of someone who's listening to that content through a screen reader. Short of that example, if you just have a really complex image that has a pretty long description, think about putting it into the narrative. And you can actually use alternative text, the narrative of the document, potentially your caption, all together to convey the full text equivalent to someone. So for example, if I have a 2-paragraph description of an image that's very, very detailed, then in the alternative text, I might say that the description of the image follows. I might give just an introduction for what it is, but I might then route somebody or let somebody know that the longer description of this is in the next 2 paragraphs. There's one other thing that we want to think about with images, and that is, I'll go back into my edit. That is whether or not the image actually has meaning. And if the image doesn't, then we don't really want to worry about having it announced. So what I'm trying to find here is whether or not I can actually hide this image. And when I say hide this image, what I mean is leave the image on the page, but not have the alternative text read aloud to somebody using a screen reader. In this case, if the image is purely decorative, in other words, it conveys no meaning whatsoever, in WordPress, I can just leave this alternative text blank and it will mark it as decorative. So again, think about that really carefully before you do that, because if the image has any meaning at all and you make it decorative, then it's not going to be announced at all. In some platforms, what you'll see, as opposed to just leaving the alternative text field empty, you'll actually see a checkbox to mark the image as decorative. So look for some narrative instruction. This actually says underneath the alternative text field, leave empty if the image is purely decorative. Look for an instruction like that, or look for that checkbox that says mark as decorative. Alternative text is contextual. So this same picture of our beautiful gray tabby might have different alternative text depending on how I'm using it. Generally speaking, logos will have the same alternative text because they don't tend to change. Their meaning tends to be the same, but there are still situations where that's not even true. For example, if you're writing a graphic design article about a logo, or you use part of a logo as an example in that context, then the alternative text might be much more about what the logo looks like, font choices, color choices, etc. The way I suggest people think about it is, what would you say if you were reading the content to somebody over the telephone? When you got to the image, what would you say? And that is a decent beginning of a train of thought to getting to good text equivalence. Any questions so far? There's a comment in the chat that I missed that our visually impaired lead recommends staying away from italics as it elongates certain letters. And font choice is something, frankly, there's not much guidance about in what we call our normative success criteria, in the standards themselves for web accessibility. But there's a lot of data out there about readability. There's also a lot of data out there that readability is really variable. There are some rules of thumb that we follow. Don't fully justify your text. For example, it changes word and sentence shapes and can make text a little bit more difficult to read. There are some rules of thumb like that that come out of good research, but there are always folks that are the exception to the rule. And with font choice in particular, I think that there are, I don't even know if you'd call them exceptions. There are enough folks that, one rule for this set of folks is really, that's good for this set of folks is really bad for this set of folks over here. But I think conversations about font choice are always really, really interesting. So I really only want to take up another few minutes before I wrap up with some resources. So I am going to make a point about link text, especially when you're on the web, when you're typing content for a web page. It makes all the sense in the world to use descriptive link text and only descriptive link text. So I'm going to insert a hyperlink into the page. In the WordPress editor, there's a little button that's kind of the universal symbol for links now, that looks basically like the link of a chain. And I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to type in www.okstate.edu. But I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to open up my link options. And what I have when I get into my link options window is a field for the URL, which is the actual website address. And I've got a field labeled link text. So now I've got my OK state down here in a search. I don't really need that. What I'm doing is I'm typing the web address, so www.okstate.edu into the URL. In the link text, I'm going to type Oklahoma State. I'm going to type Oklahoma State University homepage. Link text varies based on context as well. For this example, I'm just going to go with Oklahoma State University homepage. So when I click on add link, what I actually see in the page is the text that it was the descriptive piece, right? It says Oklahoma State University homepage. The web address is embedded back behind the link. it's really helpful and important to use descriptive link text. Now, the standards say that link text only needs to be descriptive if it's out of context. You can have more vague link text under the standards as long as it's in context. So if I had a paragraph and I had a short link that I wanted to put in, according to the standards, it's okay. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that in the real world, for somebody who uses a screen reader, they can actually have the reader announce all of the links on a page to them all at once, right? So when I land on a page, if it's a new web page, my eyes tend to skim around to look at headings, to look at visuals, and to look at links. And I feel like links give me an idea of where this web page sits in relation to other web pages, right? And a screen reader will do something very equivalent when it gives that list of links. So if you have a link, for example, if you have several links on a page that say click here or read more, I think we've all encountered that more than likely. When those are put into that link list, you'll just have several links with the same link text for someone. So we recommend trying to find a way to have descriptive and unique link text throughout your content, if at all possible. There might be times when it's a challenge. It could be that the widget that you have is already pre-configured to have a little button or a label that says, click here or read more. And if you're somewhat constricted by that, it might be something, again, where you can influence things with your web designers. But in general, it's better to have descriptive link text than to have either redundant or out of context link text. John, you asked any thoughts about the length of link text. This is something about the, for touch. So a couple of answers. So he added to that about the length of links given people using touch screens. Yeah, 2-word links, unless it's on a button, which that's a whole other conversation, are a little bit difficult to tap. I do think there's merit to, again, having descriptive link text because it does tend to lead to a little bit longer link. I don't think you want to have a paragraph that's linked. I remember hearing, and this is the equivalent of reading it on Wikipedia, but I have heard somebody recommend, for some reason, 6 to 7 words for link text as being kind of the optimal amount. I think that you're going to see that slide either way. There are going to be times when link text can be a little bit shorter. There will be times when it's a little bit longer, but it does, as I think you're speaking to, John, give you a bigger target for those who are using a touch screen, and especially a phone with a smaller screen where everything is smaller. If you have a little bit of text that says click here on a phone, I'm going to have to pinch and zoom to be able to tap it more than likely. So good question. So there's more stuff I could go into. Let's face it, we're on Zoom all the time. There's no reason to try to go over. I'll ask for any other questions that you all might have about what I've covered, or even if it's a little bit outside of the scope of what I've covered, I'm happy to try to field those as well if we do have time. Sally, the webinars are, and actually I might ask Dave, if you are there, if you could drop the link to the webinars page into the chat. I'll put you on the spot. I think that the registration links are all out on the AT3 Center website. And you can go ahead and, I believe, register for the next 2 on testing, as well as the one that I believe wraps us up for this year's series on accessibility in procurement and use. And I can also try to find it real quick. I want to show you a couple of resources. These are in slides, so you're not missing anything in the slides. So we've got, and I'll get that, Sally, I'll get that link in there. One of us will get that link in there. We have a set of resources that are actually out on the AT3 Center website. And this has some archived training that we have done before. It also has information broken up by section about accessibility in different contexts. We're working with AT3 Center to update that a bit. And in the meantime, I'm going to give you a set that we, myself and Lissa at AbleTech, updated in the last few months. It was in the kind of peak pandemic panic, at least. We decided that there's enough volume of information out there about accessibility that we wanted to kind of curate a set of resources. This is what I mentioned off the top, where we have a section that is specific to, this might not be where I want to be. I'll get a different link in there. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. This is the resources page. Lisa, thanks for putting that in there. So the link that I just dropped in, it's outrageously long, but hey, this is where we get into an updated version of that AT3 Center link. And what we've done in this web accessibility section is group information about different content management systems into one place. This was just about everything that we could find. We're certainly open to adding more. So if you know of a resource that we have not found, feel free to reach out to AT3 Center to let us know. But we've got WordPress, we've got Wix, we've got Squarespace, Plone, Joomla. We do have Adobe Experience Manager and Drupal as well. And so this was really all we could find. And this is our website, our web presence. We're looking at what we know people are using in Oklahoma, but we tried to think about what other folks are using as well. So might not be comprehensive, but it's still hopefully helpful. Then one piece that I was afraid I wouldn't have time to get to, and that is dealing with tables. And I'm going to drop another link into the chat that links out to the source. This is the World Wide Web Consortium's, one of their pages, one of their tutorials on accessibility. This one is specific to data tables. And the one thing I'll say about tables that doesn't take long to say is don't use them to hold content on the page. If you can avoid it at all, then please do. Leave tables for data and for organizing and presenting data. And this resource that I just dropped in the chat will speak to the concepts behind accessible tables. How and what you can do in your learning management or content management system will vary. Even in WordPress, we've looked at a couple of different plugins that do pretty well for really basic tables that have maybe a single row running across the top with row headers and then just columns under that, and everything is just one-to-one header to column. When you get more complex, there are things you can do in HTML to make a very accessible data table that does have different layers of table headers and maybe row headers. But how you do that, you may have to Google a little bit to find platform-specific information about how to cover it. But I wanted to at least give you this resource. It's I think it's in our set of resources. If it's not now, then we'll add it. But I thought since we'd probably not be able to get to it, I wanted to pass that along. Any other questions or comments or concerns before we reach the bottom of the hour? Sally, I recommend against it. Well, it might depend. Ideally, your web environment will let you just put a couple of columns up. That's the answer to what you're describing, which is basically having pros on one side and cons on the other. Now, if you're actually going to have pros as a header for one of the columns and cons as a header for the other, well, I think there's a good case there that that's a data table. And so it fits the mold. Yeah, there are lots of ways to deal with something like pros and cons, but that's a good question. That's a good question. Well, I believe we are at the end of our time together. I do want to thank you all so much for joining us. Please do check out the next webinars that we will finish out this year on. Again, that's 2 on accessibility testing and 1 on looking at accessibility in making decisions like platform selections. We look forward to all 3 of those very much. So hope to have some of you all back. Thank you all so much again, and everybody be safe and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, and Dave and Jamie and everybody, thanks again for handling all of the logistics behind the screen. Appreciate it.
You bet, Rob. Very happy.
All right, well, until next time, we'll see y'all later.